السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على حضرة سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم افتح علينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا أكرم الأكرمين. أما بعد. So Alhamdulillah, welcome to Abhari's Isaghuji, an introduction to logic, which comes to you from Cairo, Egypt, and hence is the honking. Cairo is a busy city, so Alhamdulillah, this course comes to you from Cairo, Egypt, covering Imam Athiruddin Al-Abhari's Isaghuji, which is a primer that he wrote for beginners, for students at a beginner level who wish to delve into the art of logic and who wish to master the Islamic sciences. Today, inshallah ta'ala, we'll talk about the author and the text. We'll touch briefly on the art of logic, but inshallah ta'ala, through the author's text itself, we'll talk about the subject and the aim of and the benefit of the art of logic, inshallah ta'ala, which will come bi'idhnillah in the coming class. In the coming class, we'll begin the reading of the text, inshallah. And at the beginning, in the author's introduction or preface, he speaks about the importance of logic and the role of logic. He touches very, very briefly on that. And inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it will be then where we talk about the art of logic, its components, its divisions, the benefits of the art of logic, and so on and so forth. And this will also allow, the students who come in or join the course late or next week. This will allow them, inshallah ta'ala, to delve right into the subject matter without having anything or without having too much of a catch up for them, inshallah ta'ala. So the art of logic is about reasoning. The art of logic is about how do we as human beings, and especially as scholars and students of sciences, how do we reason? How do we come about conclusions? How do we make conclusions? How do we present our claims? How do we support our claims, our opinions? All right? How do we prove them? All right? It's about conceptualizations. It's about concepts, and how do we define concepts? It's about the relationship between concepts and propositions, assertions. All right. So the art of logic is very important for the student of knowledge. Anybody who's studying any sort of science, of the traditional sciences, of the Islamic sciences, the art of logic, mastering the art of logic, or having a solid grip or a solid grasp rather of the art of logic is very important, is essential for advancing and developing into the various sciences. Whether you're interested into theology, whether you're interested into usul al-fiqh or grammar, whatever branch of science. Obviously, some sciences depend on logic more than others, but the art of logic is all sciences require reasoning. All right. Sciences are all about reasoning and opinions and proving positions and so on and so forth, and defining concepts and defining notions and so on and so forth. So the art of logic is essential for the students of knowledge, and this has been the tradition of the Muslim scholars for centuries. in this course, this is a level 2 course, all right? We won't delve into comparisons, meaning this is not a course that provides, for example, a comparative outlook between traditional logic and modern logic, for example. All right, it's not a course. Also, it's not a course that delves into applications. We will give examples, and we'll provide relevant examples, and we'll show how the concepts that we study, or the rules of logic that we study, how they relate, right? How they relate. We'll touch upon that. How they relate to theology, for example. How they relate to usul fiqh. But our main aim, our primary objective, is not to turn this course into an applied logic course. We need first to understand what logic is in and of itself. We need to understand the rules of logic. We need to have a firm grip of them. We need to be comfortable with the terminology. We need to be comfortable with the rules. All right, and delving into comparisons or delving into applications without understanding these rules, without being familiarized with the terminologies, that won't help students. All right, it is useful, but that comes at a later stage. We need first to identify the basics. We need first to understand them. We be comfortable with them, applying them to simple examples that are easy to understand and very easy to catch before we delve into applications. This is very important. This has been the nahj, or the manhaj, the path that we learn from our shuyukh, is that we begin with the basics first. When we master them, we start applying these. We get examples to practice, and you'll find that, inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala, throughout the classes and within the quizzes as well. But delving into marginal issues at this point, or issues of application and comparative epistemology, for example, like, the difference between, as I said, traditional logic and modern logic. Questions like, what is the difference between traditional logic and Buddhist logic, for example? These are fair questions. These are very important questions, but they should not be addressed at this stage. All right. At this stage, what we need to do is understand the art of logic as Imam Athiruddin Al-Abhari presented it for the beginners. All right. This is what we ought to master. Otherwise, we're going to finish up a course without. We'll have bits and pieces from here and there. We'll know some questions and answers, all right? But mastering the art itself at a beginner level, so that when you read usul fiqh, when you attend another class, whether it's Seeker's Guidance or anywhere else, when you attend another class, a beginner level class, or an intermediate level class in usul fiqh, or a beginner level or an intermediate class in theology, all right, or in fiqh, or in grammar, or in hadith, all right, you need to have a solid grasp of the beginner level of logic, all right, so you can apply, all right. So this is what we need to be concerned about at this stage, and this will be our approach in studying this text, inshallah ta'ala. So this text that we'll be studying is called Isaghuji, and it is written by a great scholar. His name is Al-Imam, or is known as Al-Imam Athiruddin Al-Abhari, and we'll begin, inshallah ta'ala, by his biography. The author of the text, Isaghuji, his name is Al-Mufaddal ibn Umar ibn Al-Mufaddal. Right? This is his name. He's named after his grandfather. His title is Athiruddin, and Athiruddin means the chosen one of the religion. Right? The chosen one of the religion. Imam Athiruddin Al-Abhari, he was born near the end of the 6th Hijri century. Right? So the late 500s. When we say, the late 500s, the 500s is the 6th century, because see, from 0 to 100, that's the first. Once you cross the 100, that's the second. Right? So 100 plus, that's the 2nd century. Under the 100, that's the first. Right? So under 200, that's the 2nd century. Under 300, that's the 3rd. Under 400, that's the 4th. Right? Under 500, that's the 5th. So 400 plus is the 5th. Right? 500 plus is the 6th century. So he was born at the end or near the end of the 6th century. So we're talking about late 500s, 500 Hijri. So he was born about over 800 years ago. Right? He was born over 800 years ago. Now, historians argue that he was born in Abhar, which is a city between Qazvin. Arabs, they call it Qazwin, with a W, and Zanjan, and these. We'll look at the map, inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so you can understand where they are located, or where he was born. But we'll look at a modern map, and thus he was referred to as Al-Abhari, because he was born in Abhar. And some scholars say it's Abahar, so with a fatha above the ba. And he lived for a while in Samarkand, and then he traveled to Baghdad and so on and so forth. We'll talk about that later on, inshallah ta'ala. So this is, this is the where the basics of his biography. Let's take a look at where he was born. We said he was born at the city of Abhar. So as you can see here, on the left hand side, there's the red arrow that's pointing upwards. This is Abhar, which is located, as you can see, between Zanjan on its left and Qazvin on its right, and this is located today in modern day Iran. And then you could see on the right hand side, now we move from the left hand side to the right hand side. You could see the arrow that's pointing to the right, the red arrow, and it points to Samarkand, and this is where he lived for a while. Samarkand was a very was a hub. Samarkand was known for a tradition of scholarship, and many scholars traveled to Samarkand. Many scholars came from Samarkand, and it was a melting pot. So Samarkand was a key area for scholars who were from Persia. If they're not from Samarkand already, they pass by Samarkand, they visit Samarkand at some point, in their lives, because this is where it was a center of knowledge for Muslims for many centuries. So he was born at Abhar, and he traveled to Samarkand. As I mentioned, he traveled to Baghdad, which is in Iraq. And Samarkand is in modern day Uzbekistan. Now, his teachers. Now, it is very important to know the teachers of a scholar, all right? Because the indications that we acquire and that we learn from knowing a scholar's teachers are many, right? It tells us a lot about his approach to the sciences and his approach of knowledge, because different teachers have different approaches. It tells us also about his interests. It tells us also about his expertise. It tells us about also his manners. Uh, so there are many indications, there are many things that we could learn from knowing scholars, teachers. Imam Athiruddin al-Abhari studied with Al-Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi. But this is contested. I mean, there are some scholars, some historians say no, he was not a direct student of Imam al-Razi, because Imam al-Razi passed away 606. Is it possible that Imam Athiruddin Abhari studied with Imam al-Razi? Yes. I mean, if we suppose that Imam Athiruddin Abhari was, let's say, was born, somewhere like in the mid, 500, 580 something, let's suppose, all right? So, and Imam al-Razi passed away 606, so that means, when Imam al-Razi passed away, Imam Athiruddin Abhari would be close to 20 years old, and that is, students, back in the day, they begin their studies at a very early stage, at a very early age. So by the age of 15 and 16, they are already, reaching advanced level. If not, maybe that. I mean, it varies from one scholar to another, but I would say they're already into the intermediate level. All right, if not the advanced. So. But obviously, if Imam Athiruddin al-Abhari studied with Imam al-Razi, it would not be for too long. All right. But as I said, it's contested. Some scholars, some historians who establish this fact that he did in fact study with Imam al-Razi because of an ijaza that was found in which Imam Athiruddin al-Abhari his name is mentioned in the chain of narration, and in that chain of narration, Imam Athiruddin al-Abhari, this ijaza is not written by him, but it's a later ijaza by a scholar in which he gives an ijaza to his student, and he mentions in his chain of transmission, he mentions Imam Athiruddin al-Abhari taking from Al-Imam al-Razi. So according to that, this group of scholars, they say that is a proof that, because so-and-so mentioned, Imam Athiruddin al-Abhari, direct teacher, mentioned Imam al-Razi as a direct teacher for Imam Athiruddin al-Abhari, that is a proof. Others say, that's not, a solid proof to establish this. But, it is important to be aware of it. All in all, he belongs to the Razian school, all right? Because he studied with Qutb al-Misri. Qutb al-Misri is was one of Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi's main disciples, all right? And he has many important works, though to my knowledge, none of them has been published yet. But Qutb al-Misri has important works in philosophy and also in medicine. All right. So Imam Athiruddin al-Abhari benefited greatly from Qutb al-Misri, or al-Misri. Al-Misri, that's more of an Egyptian pronunciation of Misr. So he studied with Qutb al-Misri. He passed away, his teacher, Qutb 618 Hijri. All right. He also studied with Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus. Now, Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus, Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus was when you read his biography in Tabaqat al-Shafi'iyya al-Kubra by Taj al-Din al-Subki, his biography is phenomenal, all right? But subhanallah, his works are lost. At least to this very day, we're not aware of any work by Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus, any work that survived. But Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus, al-Mawsili, is from Mosul, from Iraq, has been known as one of the world's most intelligent men. This is how he's described by historians. They say كان من أذكياء العالم. Right? كان من أذكياء العالم. So Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus, they say that he knew sciences. There were sciences that he knew that nobody else. He mastered sciences that nobody else at his time heard of. All right? And he was a great scholar especially in the rational sciences, the philosophy, theology, astronomy, engineering, physics, the various branches of natural philosophy. And Athir al-Din al-Abhari, the author of Isaghuji, when he went to study with Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus, he was already a published scholar. The works of Athir al-Din al-Abhari were already, circulated, all right? And students began to study his works. So when he traveled to Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus in Iraq, in Mosul, and I mentioned early Baghdad. I should have said Mosul but obviously, if he traveled to Mosul, most likely he also visited Baghdad. But he resided in Mosul in Iraq for a time studying with Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus, and he did that after he was already an established scholar. He was his works were already circulated and published, obviously not in the sense of today's world of publishing, but they were copied and they're sold and they were available for students and teachers and institutions, and they were beginning already to be part of the various curricula for institutions. So he traveled to Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus. He began to study with Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus astronomy and other applied mathematics and applied physics, the various disciplines of applied mathematics and physics and so on and so forth, and astronomy. And it is narrated that Imam Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus was asked, what do you think of Al-Abhari? Is he a great scholar? So Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus says something magnificent. He said something like, I don't know. And they say, how come he's your student? He said, well, we never got into a debate. All right? And this means that Athir al-Din al-Abhari, sat with his teacher, Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus, like a beginner. He went to Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus already an established scholar, a published author. His works are not only read, but they are studied and they are used as a manual for, different sciences, usually logic and philosophy, right? Because most of his works were authored in these two disciplines. And yet, when he traveled to perhaps one could easily say that Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus at the time was the top, notch, scholar in the entire ummah at that time, right? To that extent. So Athir al-Din al-Abhari had great respect for that, right? So what did he do? He did not go to Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus to challenge him or to get into debates and intimidate him or anything of that sort. No. He went to Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus and he sat in front of him to learn from him. And Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus used to, when he used to receive questions, he used to dictate answers, and Abhari was amongst those students who Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus trusted. So he sat, with Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus as a beginner. He did not delve into debates and things of that sort, right? Even though, on paper, he was allowed to do so. He was already a scholar, right? So if he went up to Kamal al-Din ibn Yunus and he said, how about we debate this, this issue or this, Kamal ibn Yunus would not have rejected. But the point is, and Kamal ibn Yunus did not, reject that Al-Abhari is a scholar, but what level? He did not debate with me. Right? So you could see how honest Kamal ibn Yunus is. Right? He said, if you were asking about my own judgment, right? He did not delve in a debate with me. Right? So, and one could also say that Kamal ibn Yunus was hinting for a certain adab, a certain etiquette. Right? Because he said, because Athir-Din Abhari is already known, and he said that he did not delve in a debate. Right? And perhaps the person who was asking the question, I don't know, Allahu A'lam, we have good willing in all Muslims. But usually questions about, the ranks of scholars and what level that scholar, of or which level does he belong to, and, what, is he a master of this or not? These sort of questions are usually, they usually cause problems, right? Though if they are asked, sincerely and with adab, they should not be a problem. But sometimes when they occur, or when these questions rise from contemporaries, there causes some jealousy and so on and so forth. So perhaps Kamal ibn Yunus in his response, he was hinting for an adab. Meaning that Athiruddin al-Abhari was a man of adab, was a man of good manners. Right? Naam. So he studied with Kamaluddin ibn Yunus al-Mawsili. So as we said, Fakhruddin al-Razi, which is contested by some historians, Qutbuddin al-Misri, who is al-Razi's main disciple, and Kamaluddin ibn Yunus al-Mawsili, who was known to be as one of the world's most intelligent men. His students of Imam Athiruddin al-Abhari, we'll name 5 of them. The first one of them is Najmuddin al-Qazwini al-Katibi. Arabs, they say al-Qazwini. He is known as Najmuddin al-Qazwini, Najmuddin al-Katibi, and he's the author of Ar-Risala Shamsiyya. Right, it's a very popular treatise that was explained by Qutbuddin al-Razi. That is different than Qutbuddin al-Misri that we just talked about. And it was also explained by Sa'ad al-Din al-Taftazani and others, but these are the two very famous. These are the two common commentaries, or because the most the famous one is, and the most common one is is Qutbuddin al-Razi's commentary, which is known as Taysir al-Qawa'id al-Mantiqiyya في شرح الرسالة الشمسية. And this is this is considered a obviously in their time that was still a beginner's level text, but in our time this is an advanced level text, and this is one of the texts that I studied with some of my teachers at Risala Shamsiyya, and sometimes along with the sharh of Qutbuddin al-Razi, and there's a hashiyah, and there are a number of hawashi, number of super commentaries that were written on Qutbuddin al-Razi's commentary on Risala Shamsiyya. So back to Najmuddin al-Qazwini al-Katibi, was a great scholar who is known for Risala Shamsiyya, but he has also a number of works. Najmuddin al-Qazwini, he wrote commentaries on the works of Imam al-Razi. So he wrote a commentary on Al-Muhassal of Al-Imam Al-Razi. He wrote a commentary on Al-Mulakhas of Al-Imam Al-Razi. So you could see the link. All right. So the main student of Athiruddin Al-Abhari is a commentator on the works of Al-Razi. And Al-Razi is either direct teacher, of Athiruddin Al-Abhari, or he's like, the teacher of his teacher. So you could see the link. You could see the link where Najmuddin al-Katibi, student of Athiruddin al-Abhari, a student of Qutbuddin al-Misri, a student of Fakhruddin al-Razi. This is like this is a chain of like great minds. All right. Najmuddin al-Qazwini al-Katibi. This is it's very important to keep in mind that you could see it as the two, the end point and in a sense, the end point and the beginning point and the end point. Obviously, there's no end in knowledge and there's no end in studying. But, casually speaking, since we're looking at a curriculum, so if the first text that is studied by Athiruddin al-Abhari, and the last text that is studied is written by Najmuddin al-Katibi, the student of Athiruddin al-Abhari. All right? So students, even after they leave Isaghuji and they study, various texts, but then they reach a Risala Shamsiyya, which is written by Al-Katibi, who is a student of Athiruddin Abhari, the author of the beginner's level primer, which is Isaghuji. Naam. Obviously, we'll talk about why is it called Isaghuji, and which is a Greek term, and so on and so forth when we begin to read it, inshaAllah ta'ala. طيب. Another student of Athiruddin al-Abhari is Nasiruddin al-Tusi. Nasiruddin al-Tusi, who Najmuddin al-Katibi passed away 675 Hijri. Nasiruddin al-Tusi passed away 672. Who was an author of Sharh al-Isharat, which is a commentary on al-Isharat wa tanbihat, the famous primer of the philosophy textbook, basically written by Ibn Sina. And he authored also other notable philosophical works. Nasiruddin al-Tusi is considered widely by historians to be a Shi'i. There are some Sunnis who claim that he was a Sunni, but the majority of historians, whether Sunni or non-Sunnis, they claim him to be a Shi'i. He's a Nasiruddin al-Tusi, there are some controversies around him. There are those who made him an Ismaili. But regardless of his theological, his own personal beliefs, Nasiruddin al-Tusi had wrote influential works in philosophy, right? That are strictly philosophical, that does not delve into doctrines of theology or creed or things of that sort. Though he did write a book called, or a text on a philosophical theology textbook or manual called At-Tajrid, and the argument or the dispute between historians is about the part on imama. Was it written by him or was it written by his son, and so on and so forth. All in all, Nasiruddin al-Tusi attended the classes of Athiruddin al-Abhari, and this tells you something, that he did not, Athiruddin al-Abhari, we don't know whether al-Tusi was outspoken of his doctrine, but when he was attending for Athiruddin al-Abhari. But the point is, Athiruddin al-Abhari's class was open for everybody, and everybody, as long as they within the class they respect the the teacher, and they respect the school which the teacher belongs to. Having good manners and etiquette while studying, and so on and so forth. Then the classes are, they welcome everybody. So subhanallah, Nasir al-Din al-Tusi was allowed. He was studying with Athiruddin al-Abhari. This is like online classes now. The online classes, they, we people from different backgrounds could attend. Anybody could attend. This class, for example. طيب. Another student of Athiruddin al-Abhari is Shamsuddin al-Asfahani, and we're talking about Shamsuddin Abu Abdullah al-Asfahani, right? Muhammad ibn Mahmud, who passed away 600 Hijri. 688 Hijri. 688 Hijri. He is the author of Sharh al-Mahsul. Al-Mahsul is a, you could say it's an usul fiqh, not encyclopedia, but it's a multi-volume usul fiqh textbook by Al-Imam Al-Razi. So Shamsuddin Abu Abdullah Al-Asfahani wrote a commentary on Al-Mahsul of Al-Imam Al-Razi. Note that this is the second, another student of Athiruddin Al-Abhari, who serves the works of Fakhruddin Al-Razi. And Imam Fakhruddin Al-Razi, we did not talk about him much, because he's, as they say, narun ala alam. وَنِبْرَاسٌ فِي ظُلَمٍ. He's Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi is a great scholar of Islam, one of the main scholars of Islam. He's the author of a great tafsir known as Mafatih al-Ghaib, and he wrote multiple, numerous works in theology, philosophy. He wrote a biography of Imam al-Shafi'i. He was a Shafi'i jurist. He wrote also extensively in Usul al-Fiqh and has very, very important contributions. Al-Mahsul is a very important contribution in Usul al-Fiqh. He wrote an explanation of the divine names of Allah. He has a number of treatises. He wrote he also has contributions in medicine. So Imam al-Razi was a great scholar of Islam, and he's like a turning point in the history of theology. Right? Theology prior Fakhruddin al-Razi was something, and then after Fakhruddin al-Razi was something else. Right? And he was after Imam al-Ghazali. Imam al-Ghazali, you could say he opened the door for Imam al-Razi. But then Imam al-Razi is the one who, just, delved right into, debates and discussions with philosophers. Most of the comparative theological work prior Imam al-Razi was between Ash'aris and Mu'tazilis. But then, after Imam al-Ghazali wrote his Tahafut al-Falasifa and he wrote Maqasid al-Falasifa, that opened the door for Imam al-Razi, to engage with philosophy as a Sunni theologian, and his engagement resulted into a profound had a profound impact on the Muslim Ummah and the traditional sciences, and it helped greatly advance the theological and the philosophical discussions in the Muslim Ummah. So you could see Imam al-Razi's works were explained by the students of Athiruddin al-Abhari. All right? Um, One more thing that we ought to mention here with Shamsuddin al-Asfahani, the student of Athiruddin al-Abhari, is that Shamsuddin al-Asfahani, there are two Shamsuddin al-Asfahanis. All right, one has a kunya Abu Abdullah, and he's the student of al-Abhari, but then there is Abu Thana, and Abu Thana is passed away 749, and he authored a commentary on At-Tajreed, right? Called Tasdeed al-Qawa'id. At-Tajreed is At-Tusi's philosophical theology work. And obviously Sunnis, when they wrote commentaries on At-Tusi's work, when they come to the part where he speaks about imama, all right, they refute his Shi'i positions, all right? But they used his work as a textbook, and they wrote commentaries. And there's Tasdeed al-Qawa'id, and upon Tasdeed al-Qawa'id, there are super commentaries by most notably, is the Hashia by Sayyid Sharif al-Gurgani. So Shamsuddin al-Asfahani Abu Thana is the author of Tasdeed al-Qawa'id, right? Meanwhile, Shamsuddin al-Asfahani Abu Abdullah is the author of Sharh al-Mahsul, also the author of a book called Al-Qawa'id al-Kulliyah. All right. So Al-Qawa'id al-Kulliyah and Sharh al-Mahsul are by the Asfahani, the student of Athiruddin al-Abhari, the author of the primer that we'll be studying. Now, last but not least, there are two other students of al-Abhari. They're very interesting because we find the historical the history books and the biographies and so on and so forth, that two of Athiruddin Abhari students were historians, right? And this is very magnificent. I mean, he's a scholar of philosophy, theology, logic, astronomy, cosmology, right? Astronomical engineering, and then two of his students are historians, and they became they're very notable historians. I mean, one of them is purely a historian, who's Ibn Khallikan, but the other is he talked about history, but he's more of a geographer and cosmographer. Right? And he wrote a book that is very, very famous called The Ajaib al-Makhluqat, The Wonders of Creation, that Zakaria al-Qazvini. Again, this is the third time I say, the Arabs say al-Qazwini. So Zakaria al-Qazvini was wrote very influential and notable works in geography and the geography of Arab ancestry. And he wrote the book Ajaib al-Makhluqat, The Wonders of Creation, which is about a work about of geography and the geography of the cosmos. And so that is Zakaria al-Qazvini. But there's also Abu al-Abbas ibn Khallikan, who's mentioned first here in front of you. Abu al-Abbas ibn Khallikan was a renowned Shafi'i historian who wrote a very famous history encyclopedia known as Wafayat al-A'yan, which al-Imam al-Safadi later on continued the work of Ibn Khallikan and added to it in Al-Wafi bil-Wafayat. Now, so Ibn Khallikan passed away 681, and Qazvini a year after him, 682 Hijri. طيب. Now, the famous works of Athiruddin al-Abhari, obviously the introductory logic primer Isaghuji that we'll be studying inshallah ta'ala in this course, and Hidayat al-Hikmah. Hidayat al-Hikmah is one of the most famous and influential post-classical philosophy works. It was widely taught, still taught to this very day, but not on a wide scale as it used to be. And it is often referred to as al-hidayah al-athiriyah, meaning the hidayah of Athiruddin al-Abhari. Hidayah means guidance, and hikmah is literally it means wisdom, but here it means philosophy. So the guidance of philosophy. So these are his most famous works. He wrote other works in what we call general metaphysics, al-umur al-amma. He wrote a number of works in metaphysics other than like Zubdat al-Haqa'iq, for example, or Zubdat al-Asrar, the essence of secrets. He wrote books of metaphysics, or what we call al-ilm al-kulli, the universal science, right? So he wrote in the universal science. He wrote a number of works in the universal science. His most famous one is Hidayat al-Hikmah, which has been published and even translated to English. But the other works were not published. Maybe one of them or something. He had other works the other works included logic. His contribution to logic is not only the Isaghuji, his other works. His works of metaphysics, they're usually composed of a first part on logic, and then a second part on natural philosophy, or al-umur al-amma, and then a part on what we call al-ilm al-ilahi, right? Which is the specific metaphysics, right? But as you could see, most of his contributions were philosophical contributions. He has a treatise that in theology was published twice, once in the Arab world in Jordan, and the other in Turkey. But it's not widely. It hasn't been. I mean, it was not part of a curriculum, for example. But it was, researchers and academians now, they're interested in it because it is sort of the only theological work that he wrote. But all of his contributions were in the area of philosophy and logic. Hidayatul Hikmah itself, which is a work, as I said, in metaphysics, it had which covers natural philosophy and the universal science. But he wrote an introduction on logic for Hidayatul Hikmah. But later on, commentators, they focused on the natural philosophy and the specific metaphysics, or what we call the universal science, or metaphysics. Naam. So he also wrote a number of works on in various topics of astronomy. He has a textbook in astronomy and a number of treatises that talk about astronomical devices and gadgets that they used to use back in the day. So he has a number of works that relate to astronomy and astronomical devices and gadgets. Now, so these are his most famous works and contributions. Now, Isaghuji itself, which is the text that we'll be studying, inshallah ta'ala, is an introductory text. But Isaghuji established an exegetical tradition. I mean, there's an entire tradition of Isaghuji commentaries, right? The commentaries and the super commentaries that were written upon some of these commentaries are, there are so many. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of manuscripts of Isaghuji, commentary of Isaghuji itself, the primer, and the commentaries upon this primer as well. So it is very, very famous. Has been taught throughout the Muslim, throughout the Muslim ummah, various places of the Muslim ummah. It was taught in India, in Persia, in Egypt, in Al-Maghrib, right? So we're talking about Libya, Algeria, Morocco, modern day, Tunisia. So throughout in Iraq, Isaghuji has been taught since it was written, has been taught throughout the Muslim world, right? Various institutions, right? There is a competing introductory level text, which is As-Sullam Al-Munawraq, written by Al-Allama Al-Akhdari Al-Maliki, which is in poetic form. So it's a poem. It was widely received in Egypt and obviously widely common in Morocco. Or Al-Maghrib, so basically Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Mauritania, various places in Africa. You might, so Asham as well. Sulam Munawraq was studied in Asham, Iraq. But then, Indians, you'd find them studying, Isaghuji, for example. So Isaghuji, wherever you find Al-Akhdari, wherever you find As-Sulam Al-Munawraq, you find Isaghuji. Any Muslim locality, any Muslim institution in which there is a Sulam Al-Munawraq, you could find Isaghuji. But not every place where you find Isaghuji, you find the Sulam Al-Munawraq. So Isaghuji is more prevalent, right? So it received a wide reception, and it attracted numerous commentaries, and of these numerous commentaries are of various levels. So you find beginner level commentaries like the commentary by Hussam al-Din al-Kati and Dawood al-Qarisi, as a Turkish Hanafi scholar. And Dawood al-Qarisi says, Isaghuji should be studied in a month. Right? You need 1 month to have a solid grip or a solid grasp, of Isaghuji. Right? And he's saying that he's saying students and teachers spend too much time with Isaghuji, and then they expand on topics and issues and so on and so forth, which is not appropriate for beginners. And they spend a year without, encompassing all the topics of Isaghuji. So he said, what you ought to do is you study it as it is, in a condensed form, without delving into comparisons and without taking a comparative approach or, an approach of an advanced level approach. If you take it for what it is, you could finish in 1 month. You could have a solid grasp of Isaghuji. Now we take it, in the duration of 3 months, right? So you have 12 weeks. So you have 12 classes. But you could think of it that if these 12 classes, if they were taken, throughout 1 month, this is like 3 classes a week, right? So obviously it is doable in a month. So these are the examples of beginner level commentaries on Isaghuji. There's also intermediate level commentaries, Al-Matla' and Mughni al-Tullab, but Al-Matla' by Shaykh Al-Islam Zakaria Al-Ansari is more common, and Al-Matla' by Shaykh Al-Islam Zakaria is available in the Seekers Academy. It's we covered Al-Matla' before. We explained it from beginning to end. And there are a number of super commentaries on Al-Matla', which is by Shaykh Al-Islam Zakaria Al-Ansari, the great Shafi'i, late Shafi'i jurist, and the student of Imam Ibn Hajar Al-Asqalani. He was a great Sufi sage as well. And it was the Shaykh of Sayyidi Abdul Wahhab Al-Sha'rani, and the Shaykh of Ibn Hajar Al-Haytami, and the Shaykh of Shihab al-Din Al-Ramli, and the Shaykh of Al-Khatib Al-Shirbini, great Shafi'i jurists. So Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria wrote Al-Matla', which is a commentary on Isaghuji, and there are a number of super commentaries on Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria's commentary. All right, and then there's an advanced level commentary by Al-Fanari, which is known as Al-Fawaid Al-Fanariya. There are Al-Fawaid Al-Fanariya. That's like the top level, one of the very top level books in the art of logic, right? A very advanced level work, and it's usually studied with a number of super commentaries. This is the peak of the obviously alongside other works. There are other works at this level, but the Al-Fawaid Al-Fanariya, alongside the super commentaries, Al-Hawashi, that were written upon Al-Fawaid Al-Fanariya, they encompass the discussions of very, very intricate and subtle rules and concepts of the art of logic. Right? Al-Fawaid Al-Fanariya. Right? So you could see how there's a scheme of commentaries. They range from beginner level to a very, very advanced. All right, and each level there's a various commentaries. And once you get, especially when you get to the intermediate level and the advanced level, where you find super commentaries upon super commentaries on the commentaries themselves. So there's an entire tradition of Isaghuji, right? And it was also translated to English at least 3 times, Isaghuji. So Alhamdulillah. So this is a work that we'll be studying together, and it was also, has been taught. Obviously, there are a number of recorded explanations or classes on Isaghuji, that you find them floating online and so on and so forth. So it's a book that has always been an aim for scholars to teach, and students through Isaghuji, they began their journey in the rational sciences, in logic, and it helped students throughout history, begin the journey of mastering logic and applying logic in the various fields of sciences. As the author himself, mentions, and we'll explain that inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the coming class. But he says in the beginning that his work encompasses all the essential matters of logic that are necessary for anyone who is starting in any sort of science. Right? So this has been the role of Isaghuji, the role that it had served since it was authored, which was about 800 years ago. For the past 800 years ago, could you imagine? For the past 8 centuries, students, ulama, of various areas, of the Muslim world, various institutions, they grew up in the traditional sciences. They developed, their careers and their studying in the traditional sciences, particularly the rational sciences, through stepping stones. Right? One of them has always been Isaghuji. So Alhamdulillah, this is the text that we'll be studying together, inshallah ta'ala. We'll begin to read the text together, inshallah, in the coming, next week, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, in the coming class. And we'll begin by talking about what does it, Isaghuji, what does it mean? We'll talk about the contents of Isaghuji, like the outline of the text. We'll read the introduction together, inshallah ta'ala. We'll talk about, through the introduction of the author, we'll explain the subject of logic and the benefit and objective of the art of logic, inshallah ta'ala. Naam. So, alhamdulillah, we reached the conclusion of today's class. Bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, if you have any questions, any concerns, any feedback, I would love to receive them, inshallah ta'ala. And also, I have to remind you of the discussion forum. It's available if you have any questions. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the class, we want as much as it is important to talk about comparative matters and so on and so forth. These are very important, I know, and they are very interesting as well. But what I really want for you is that, and want from you as well, to avoid, some students, they delve into these, they want to rush the level of responding and refuting and answering and so on and so forth, and comparing and comparative, epistemology and so on. And this is very important. As an ummah, we need that. All right? We need that. But we also need to do it in a way that is proficient. Right? We need to do it in a proficient way. And we won't be able to do it in a proficient way unless we take this. We take the gradual, natural, steps. The natural approach is that you take things gradually, as Imam Zuhri said. من أخذ العلم جملة ذهب عنه بالجملة. Whoever takes knowledge in like a general collective way, that is not gradual, wants to take everything at once, he loses everything at once. Right? So you find students are aware of articles that were written here and there, and YouTube episodes, and this article by so and so professor, and this article by so and so sheikh, and so on and so forth. But when we come to a matter of logic that is of Isaghuji, they're not, they don't know it. So how are you going to apply it when you study texts afterwards? All right? You'll always be dependent on others' presentations and episodes and articles. But if you want to be a scholar yourself, you want to be equipped with the knowledge, this is the path to take. So the more your questions are about the text itself, all right, and understanding the concepts and the rules that are mentioned explicitly mentioned in the text itself, the more you master that, the more you become familiar with that, the more you'll find it, rewarding afterwards, inshallah ta'ala. Jazakum Allah ta'ala khayran wa barakallahu ta'ala feekum. Inshallah, we begin reading Isaghuji together next week. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.